Everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters, and Last Nighters can be found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. Tonight is episode 100 of the show, and we're talking about The Social Network tonight. It's a David Fincher and Aaron Sorkin movie, and last week was a Thanksgiving episode where we celebrated the spirit of giving, talking about Tom Hanks and Castaway. This week, we're going to celebrate the spirit of entrepreneurship by discussing The Social Network with an entrepreneur. This promises to be a fun discussion. Right, guest? It's going to be a good one. Talking about something that has since been become ubiquitous in so many of our daily lives, the Facebook. Our guest is Miguel Duque. He's been a voluntarist since 2012 after discovering libertarian philosophy through the Ron Paul Revolution. Today, he is a business coach with MAPS Business Coaching. There's a website for that, mymapscoach.com. We'll have that on our show notes page. He offers weekly one-on-one coaching for business owners and entrepreneurs across all industries, and he created a free online community called Amagi Entrepreneurs at amagi.group. It's a coaching community for liberty-minded innovators, creatives, and change makers. Miguel's personal life mission is to, quote, to lay the foundations for a voluntary, peaceful world through leadership, philosophy, and love, end quote. He lives in Bellevue, Washington, right down the road from me and across the mountains from Robert, with his wife, Jamie. That's my wife's name as well. And 3 cats. I have 2 cats, a dog, 2 kids, and a Jamie myself. Miguel, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And is there anything you'd like to let our listeners know that isn't included here? Say hello to the Last Nighters audience.
Hey, hello, everybody. And hey, guys, it's a huge pleasure to be on. I mean, it's a surprise honor to be on your 100th episode, which I had no clue this was going to be. And that's certainly exciting, and congrats to you. And no, I mean, that's the long and the short of what I'm all about. And I guess just kind of one of the most recent developments was just today, at least at the time of recording here, I had a conversation with Michael Heiss, who is the founder of the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, which is doing some pretty big things to take over the Libertarian Party and continue the Ron Paul revolution through the LP. And I'll be just an additional volunteer organizer here in the state of Washington for the LP Mises Caucus, because I'm pretty excited about what the LPMC is doing. So that's just another thing that I got into recently.
All right, very good. Another thing to add to the plate, and a second helping, as it were. And I know we're recording this technically before Thanksgiving, but this will come out after Thanksgiving, and everyone will hopefully have stuffed themselves to the gills and then laid on the couch moaning and groaning as they're digesting and watching the Detroit Lions probably lose a football game. But I also want to mention that a lot of the Black Friday deals that we mentioned on the last episode are probably still going on throughout the whole weekend, all the way through Cyber Monday. So if you do catch it in time, go to lastnighters.com/Friday, and you'll find all the deals we've got. We've got Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. We've got links to Bluehost. There's links to teachable.com. It's a platform to make courses that you can sell. A whole bunch of stuff. We'll have 5 or 6 things on there, and perhaps some bonuses. So check that out at lastnighters.com/Friday. And speaking of thanking everyone, we want to thank all you guys and our guests. And we will get started on this via the Google description. And this is came out in 2010. Drama history, 2 hours and 1 minute. PG-13. They actually had to scale it back from an R for a wider appeal. It came out, like I said, 2010. 7.7 on the IMDb, 96% Rotten Tomatoes, 95% Metacritic, and 92% of Google users like it. The description reads, in 2003, Harvard undergrad and computer genius, Mark Zuckerberg, played by Lex Luthor, begins work on a new concept that eventually turns into the global social network known as Facebook. 6 years later, he is one of the youngest billionaires ever, but Zuckerberg finds that his unprecedented success leads to both personal and legal complications when he ends up on the receiving end of 2 lawsuits, one involving his former friend Spider-Man, based on the book, quote, The Accidental Billionaires. Release date October 1st, 2010. Director David Fincher. Screenplay, obviously Aaron Sorkin with all of the wordplay. This is the only role that Jesse Eisenberg has portrayed where he became Academy nominated, and that's playing Zuck the flip-flop wearing fuck. So Robert, let's get your take on the Google description and anything that I've said so far. Then we will go to our guest, Miguel.
Well, first off, Sorkin, the script by Sorkin is very, very apparent. It's one of those scripts where everybody is super clever, far more clever than they ever are in real life, where everybody just says the perfect witticism in response to the other person's dumb comment or what have you. It's this. And so it's fun to listen to. It's fun to watch, but it comes off as very, okay, this is a screenwriter kind of masturbating himself. But it's fine. I mean, I enjoy that sort of dialogue. It makes the characters come off as just, super, super intelligent, which I'm sure they are. But nobody's that witty and clever in real life. And not everybody in the stinking movie is that witty and clever in real life, even though we are talking about like Harvard level quality type people. It came off as a little bit much for me, a little bit hyper realistic, but that's fine. It's still very entertaining. But for me, this movie comes down to like an alternate title, if you could call it, and that would be like The Crimes of Mark Zuckerberg. What is he guilty of? Because that seems to be what this movie seems to be asking the question of, or posing the question. And I can think of 4 things that he's kind of on trial for. 1 is being smart. He's obviously guilty of that. 2, being a huge nerd. He's obviously guilty of that. 3, is he guilty of being a complete and total asshole? Yes, he's guilty of being a total asshole. And then 4, is he guilty of IP theft? And I think that is a very interesting question. I think Zuck himself answers it in the film when he talks about a chair builder, where, does a guy who makes a really good chair, does he owe royalties to everybody else who's made a chair, or the inventor of chairs? I think he makes a good point there. So I think that's the main crux that I saw, but it'll be fun to talk about this movie. There's all kinds of fun little avenues we could go down.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just make one quick comment. We'll go to Miguel, and that is the Sorkin language. It's very obvious, as you said. He was a writer for The West Wing as well. And it reminded me of Kevin Smith's writing in Clerks and Mallrats and such, where everyone is very quick-witted and always has something kind of funny to say. And also, and I'm going to get turning my man card again on this one, Gilmore Girls, very similar. Just this very quick, lots of dialogue, very fast responses.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, Daniel. Haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I know. You have no idea. No idea. But just, take it as Clerks or Mallrats, but in a moderately successful girl bonding television series. So,
yay!
Yeah, I know. All right. Well, let's move on to
right for Sex in the City. I wouldn't know because I've never seen that show, but I hear it had really good writing.
It could be. I'd have to ask my wife on that one. She used to own the DVD set, but I've never.
I'm being facetious anyway.
Never watched it. All right, so let's get Miguel. You can tag team in on this. Your take on anything thus far, including the Google description.
I felt like the Google description was pretty basic. Not really making any real value judgments, about the story itself. It kind of just says he encounters personal and legal challenges. Like, wow, how riveting. The story itself is, a lot, I would say, is a lot more clear cut in the narrative or the type of moral light that it basically casts the Zuck into. Interesting observation. Yeah, that was a good point about the language, about the script, and the type of dialogue that's there. Because if you think about it, even with these Ivy League students and stuff, Mark Zuckerberg is pretty universally described as like kind of an awkward, quiet guy. So, he may or may not really have all these super clever quips just, locked and ready at every opportunity. Probably, a lot in reality is just a lot more sort of awkward. Well, what are their observations? Yeah, I definitely felt like in rewatching this movie, which I don't think I had seen until since it was released back in 2010, watching it in preparation for this show, I was thinking, wow, there's a lot of good meaty stuff in here to talk about with regard to, libertarian philosophy, and you might just say philosophy in general of right and wrong, and what did he do that specifically was unethical and why? And definitely we could get into the IP law aspect of it. So there's all kinds of interesting commentary to be made. I think just in general, my takeaway was, you could tell that this was just a really highly dramatized story for the sake of making a Hollywood film, right? Though if there was even half of, if it was half true, I was left with the sense of, Zuck being pretty clearly, just a very mean-spirited, unethical person. And I mean, that's, again, just based on the story that they're telling, which undoubtedly is not 100% true because it's a dramatized film. Though I'm just saying, if to the extent to which these stories are true, you know, it really shows him being almost like a sociopathic, very elitist, very, very manipulative and dishonest individual. You know, it just goes to show everything that Facebook has come to be today. If those were truly its origins, and that those are the type of people that are involved, you know, that were involved in the birthing of Facebook, well, it's kind of no surprise that today it's this massive superpower of social engineering and censorship and, you know, cronyism and mass surveillance and you name it. I mean, just practically thought control institution, you know, more or less out of the private sector, however, extremely embedded with the, you know, Mordor, Washington, D.C., you know, machine. And so, I mean, I don't know, I'm apt to believe a lot of these negative things about Zuck, even if a lot of them might be dramatized. I did watch a YouTube video where he responded to basically a question of, hey, is this story true? And he basically said, oh, come on, it's a Hollywood film. For example, I never had a girlfriend that dumped me like in the beginning of the movie. I actually have been dating the same person since before I created Facebook. So it's like, really? Okay, that's the only example that he cited about the story being untrue. And I think that clearly they'll want to deny most of it, you know, when in reality it's probably a lot of it's, you know, has probably a lot of basis in the truth.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with that. Although it seemed to be written from the perspective of the people who felt that they were wrong, right? Like Duardo and the Winklevoss guys. It seemed to be that those were the guys that seemed to, I mean, they all signed NDAs, as I assume, or at least the Winklevosses did. I don't know if Duardo did, but I mean, I don't know how the book was written, but it seemed to be that, you know, Zuckerberg was like the villain of the piece, and then Duardo was the kind of sort of hero. I don't know. Maybe just the victim of the piece. Did you get that feeling in that? It didn't seem like it was a strict. I mean, obviously it was dramatized, but it didn't seem like it was neutrally telling the story.
I'll agree with you, Robert. And honestly, I had trouble actually following this story just because there was so much dialogue and so much detail. And as an example, the breakup scene at the very beginning, it was 8 pages of script and it took 99 takes to get it. I read that they shot over 240 hours of footage for this movie, for a 2-hour movie. So, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff and a lot of takes. And I think that the basics are, as you said, you know, it's Zuckerberg kind of on trial for several crimes, right? And I think that the biggest ones are that, yeah, he was kind of a dick to these people. But he was also the kind of dick who was able to make things happen that the others were not. And so you almost needed him to do what he did, and probably even in the manner he did it, to make it as successful as it was. And then at the end of the day, they all got paid out. So, you know, they got made more than whole, I think. I
felt like in this film, you know, I kept saying to myself as I was watching it, you know, there was a nicer way to say that, but you're not wrong. When Zuckerberg would say something, it was like, you're an asshole, but you're right. Like a bunch of time, almost every single time. Like when they were debating on whether to, you know, sell ads on Facebook or not, whether, you know, he wanted to keep it cool and ad free, and they were going to make their money a different way. It was definitely the right way to go in terms of growing the business.
Yeah, you know, I would go back and qualify all those statements that I just made with just the added commentary that my overall takeaway from the film was all those things about his unethical sort of behavior, as well as, well, there's no denying that he is an extremely talented and skilled entrepreneur at taking an idea and creating an even bigger vision for it, and having the know-how and the tenacity to go and make it into reality, to actually code it, to actually create it, and to actually accurately predict what the customers and the consumers want, to really be able to truly see what the gaps are, what the opportunities are in the market, to make a product that is unlike any other, or that really hasn't been made before. His very first questions when he was meeting privately with the Winklevoss twins his very first question was, great, what makes this different from MySpace and Friendster? Because they really weren't describing anything that was any different. And then they got into the elements of it that were exclusive, because you had to have a harvard.edu email address. And so that makes it exclusive, because Harvard girls only want to, get with Harvard guys, obviously, and so on and so forth. And they had this very small vision for it that, oh, this is going to be the Facebook, which is actually what they called it there at Harvard. All these different little, I guess it was dorms or clubs or whatever, had a old school early internet system that they called their Facebook.
And each had their own setup, their own server, right? Yes,
exactly. Yeah. And so speaking of which, part of what is depicted in the film is Zuck hacking into all of these private databases, which, whatever you want to say about IP, I think just stealing private information, he justifies it in the film as, oh, well, you should be thanking me because I just poked all these holes in your security. However, he's really, manipulating and kind of violating the privacy of these databases. And anyhow, to go back to where I was getting at was that, he saw a much bigger vision for what this social network could be than the Winklevoss twins originally even saw, because they wanted it to just be Harvard. And then boom, Zuck goes and takes it to all the other Ivy League schools. And then he gets involved with that guy, Sean Parker, who founded Napster. Yeah. And I laughed because I totally forgot that Justin Timberlake was in this movie until he just suddenly showed up. And I said, oh my God, it's Justin Timberlake. And he did such a good job, I think, playing this character, Sean Parker, this sort of very troubled .com bubble entrepreneur who, has all these drug problems and problems with partying and stuff, and also all these legal problems, all these lawsuits and filing bankruptcy and stuff. And yet he's still at it, spending a lot of money, having this really flashy Silicon Valley lifestyle that goes and takes even Zuck was thinking small when he was just thinking exclusive to Ivy League schools. Then he gets involved with Sean Parker, who says, no, dude, we're not talking $1 million. We're talking $1 billion company, and we're talking global, worldwide, and I can get you in 2 continents. And so that goes to show that that there's more to having, just an idea. It's thinking really big about it, and then being the person who's willing to put in the work to actually make it happen, while other people are just sitting around theorizing or dreaming about it instead of actually building it.
Yeah, right. Or coming up with reasons to not do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I want to direct a question to you regarding to the entrepreneurship, Miguel, and that is, it seemed that Zuckerberg was keying in on the concept of exclusivity, which, as an aside, because you've accepted me into your Amagi Entrepreneurs group, it's obviously not exclusive. And I think Groucho Marx said I would never be willing to join a club that would be willing to have me as a member. But I'm in your club and it's good. I do enjoy it. But I digress. But do you think that he was just viewing the exclusivity as the thing to make it unique and desirable, but only using it in like as a vehicle to get to a certain point until there was sufficient adoption to basically engage the network effect? Because when I became aware of Facebook, probably 2005, 2006, something like that, then you could just join as anybody. But as this movie depicts, originally it was Harvard, then it was Ivy League schools, then it was like other schools, and it's no longer the case. And also the whole ad revenue thing is now, of course, ad revenue is their big thing. And I would say to that is that it's an amazing tool for marketers bringing solutions, products, and services to very specifically targeted people who would benefit from those things. And I think that's an amazing feature of Facebook, one of the best features of Facebook, other than being able to communicate with friends and family or debate with jackasses on the internet. There's, of course, scary stuff that you alluded to at the very open. And we can go down that path talking about Sesame Credit in China and all those things. But let's round it back to my question. Do you think that the exclusivity was just a vehicle that Zuck recognized to get it to a certain point before it would basically, be where it was sufficiently like on its own 2 feet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in the way it's depicted in the film and the way that I saw it, the way that I interpreted Zuck and the Winklevoss entrepreneurial thought process was that the exclusivity was one of the major, maybe not the only, though certainly one of the major, most important differentiating factors. Like they said, girls want to get with guys who go to Harvard. And to be on this platform, you have to be at Harvard. You have to have a harvard.edu email address. That was the exclusivity aspect of it. And then, they did recognize the utility of this platform for dating purposes, for, finding a romantic partner. And I think that Zuck went and took it further than that when he had that, at least in the film, he was chatting with some guy who is asking him, hey, do you know so-and-so who's in your computer lab class? And do you know if she's dating anybody? And do you know if blah, blah, blah? And he's like, I don't know. People don't walk around with a sign that, and then he goes, it's like, oh my God, I have to code this to where everybody can publicly display their relationship status and who they're into, what genders of people they're into. So that turned out to be another differentiating factor. In addition to when he was building the thing, he talks about, it has to be clean. It has to be simple and kind of almost minimalist in design. So I think that the UI, the user interface aspects of it were another one of the key differentiating factors. Once he had all those 3 things combined, he was ready to launch it. That was his minimum viable product. And that was the infancy of Facebook, where you see over the course of the history of Facebook, you could see it as they've managed to successfully pivot a number of times in a number of ways, where originally they saw their customer is the user and their product is the user interface, the platform where people post and they see stuff. Nowadays, users are actually Facebook's product that they sell to people who want the attention of Facebook users. So, and the data for that matter on an even bigger level, where we're talking now on in terms of thinking big entrepreneurially, if we look at macroeconomic trends, there's a term being used these days that's called the 4th Industrial Revolution. Have you guys, by chance, come across that term?
Not myself.
It's pretty fascinating. The first 3 industrial revolutions were, first there was the loom, and basically farming technology. Like that was the first industrial revolution. And then second was steam power. And, steam power created all these other capabilities of locomotives and, ships and steel ships and stuff like that. That was the second industrial revolution. And then the third industrial revolution, I might mess this one up. Might be, I don't know, the computer chip or something like that. Anyhow, I digress. Well, the 4th industrial revolution is described as being sparked by data, big data, and artificial intelligence. And so it's something that we're in the midst of. It's not like something that we can look back at history and say that was the 4th industrial revolution. It's almost like instead it's something we're talking about in the context of it's happening right now, and we're in the onset of it, of the 4th industrial revolution. We're talking that big on that scale of industrial revolutions that have happened over the course of the last however many thousand years. So major stuff. And nowadays, Facebook and all the big tech companies, their actual product or their asset is their data. And data is being described as almost like the new crude oil, which, they're accumulating all this massive amounts of data to the point where eventually, as the machine learning capabilities increase of their artificial intelligence engines increase, those artificial intelligence machine learning capabilities will be able to derive insights, proprietary insights from all this massive cache of data. So for example, if we had artificial intelligence combing through the last 10 years that you have been on Facebook, generating data for Facebook, they would probably know you better. The artificial intelligence would know you better as a person than probably most of the people that you know in real life. And that's to me, that's what I see when I think of the fourth industrial revolution, is that all the big tech companies are hoarding data, and their AI is still in the early stages. However, they're going to be able to do unfathomable things once they have more advanced artificial intelligence combined with all the data that they have. So, but yeah, in the beginning, the minimum viable product was the exclusivity, the UI, and also the lack of advertisements. Like, that was something that was repeated several times, was Facebook is cool, and if we have ads, then it's no longer going to be cool. So those were some of the things that made it so different from everything else that was available up until then.
So does that mean it's no longer cool? I'll direct that to Robert.
Yeah, it's definitely not cool. It's used by soccer moms and people out in the boonies to connect with other people. I'm using it in my business as it's the premier social media networking site to disseminate information out here, because everything else sucks or is too slow, and it's just everybody's on it. So, I mean, young people aren't so much. So then it's definitely not cool. I mean, if your mom's into it.
Okay, boomer.
Lame, super lame.
Exactly. You beat me to it. I was going to say that just to also be facetious, that basically Facebook is used now by boomers and people who want to say, okay, boomer, to the boomers.
Right. And Epstein didn't kill himself.
Yes, that too.
Well, now, guys, I know that some people kind of get riled up or, wrinkle their noses at the idea of Facebook selling their data. But this is something that everybody voluntarily gives to Facebook. So, I mean, where does this indignation or upset feelings come from? When, I mean, it's like you're doing it. You're offering up all this information. You're giving it to somebody. You're giving it away, and then they turn around and make a profit off of it. Well, aren't they just being good entrepreneurs?
I would say that the negative feelings come from, similarly to how Zuck is depicted in this movie, is that okay, he may not have stolen intellectual property from the Winklevoss twins outright. Not that they didn't seem to have gotten any patents or anything like that for their idea. I think what it was Zuck being dishonest in his dealings, that the Winklevoss twins, there's still something to be said about common law and common understanding and terms when you are engaging in voluntary interactions with people, that there are unspoken and sort of unstated norms that are adhered to, that basically the Winklevoss twins would not have given him all this information about their idea had he not dishonestly led them to believe that he was in fact going to partner with them. And so it was only then that they disclosed all of these intricate details of what they were attempting to build, while he installed and built it for himself. That was dishonest. I mean, if to the extent that that's true, I'd say that it'd be hard to argue that was not that did not involve a sort of an intricate series of lies and distortions of the truth.
Yeah.
So you're saying that Zuckerberg is definitely guilty of fraud at some level?
Yeah, I think that just based on what the movie depicts, is that he committed fraud on multiple levels, including to his other friend or supposed friend,
Duardo,
who he got to sign those documents without him, understanding what those. And yes, it was Duardo's responsibility to, he says in the film, I thought they were my lawyers. Well, that's foolish. And in reality, that's probably not how it went down, because any person with a basic understanding of business ought to know that that's the sort of thing you need to hire your own lawyers to review. So not to say that it wasn't Duardo's responsibility to know what he was signing, simply that that was very clearly, an example of dishonest dealings on, not being forthcoming, with crucial information on Zuck's part.
Yeah, for the Winklevoss one, I think that their case is a little bit iffy, and the really easy way around that would have been for Zuck to just build what they had asked for in the 2 weeks or whatever, and then do his own thing and build a better mousetrap. And then it would have been a non-issue. He would have just outcompeted them on something that's far better and far different than what they had wanted. And had he not been dishonest and put them off, because really all they had was a kernel of an idea. And, what he actually created was far advanced, far beyond that. With Eduardo, that was a dishonest bullshit thing for sure. And I think Eduardo's point was, well, if he owns a third of the company, then those guys, those lawyers are working for him. They're his lawyers. It's his company, right? So I don't blame him for signing that. I mean, it was like, 5 or 6 documents, and in legalese, I mean, that's what you need a lawyer for, is the interpretation, right? To be able to put it into plain English. I think
that's a very, I think that's probably a pretty basic component of merger and acquisition. Legal language is regarding dilution of the shares. And he just didn't even bother to look at that, though it's a very good point that you make, that those lawyers really should have been representing him.
Right. And I think they were derelict in their duty, because they knew they planted that poison pill in that document.
Yeah, they were chosen. Those lawyers were hired because they were corrupt, and they were willing to knowingly have a person sign something that is different from what they understood it to be.
Right. Yeah, it was definitely not in good faith. And so I think that signature, that signing, is totally null and void as a result of it, because there was no mutual understanding.
I don't know that I could go that far, but then again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. I can't say that.
Right.
Well, I can't go so far as to say it's completely null and void, but because I do think that Duardo had personal responsibility to understand what he was signing. I mean, I get your point about the lawyers working for him and him believing they were working for him, but I mean, to what level did he know these guys? To what level did he trust them? Was he part of the hiring process of these lawyer guys, or did he just come up and, oh, you guys work for the company? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I do agree that he had a responsibility to get the stuff looked over by his own lawyers, that, to ensure that he really understood every single term that was in that paperwork. At the same time, we're just talking about, a lot of times, honestly, good moral philosophy comes from what is common sense, and because common law pretty much emerges out of common sense morality. And I think the common sense moral compass of most people would say that's bullshit. That he was misled. He was purposefully, that's fraud. I mean, that's my take on it.
Right. Yeah. And I'll agree. And they all knew what they were up to. So they were purposefully deceiving him. So I give Eduardo far more of a case than the Winklevosses, though. I mean, they all got paid as a result. And it's because Zuckerberg was able to create the behemoth out of those miscellaneous parts, that even just paying them off, I think Rashida Jones's character said, it's like paying a speeding ticket. They're getting millions of dollars. So you're going to make them happy, right? After kind of traumatizing them a bit here. But you're making billions of dollars. So, at the end of the day, this is destroying, personal relationships and making you come off as a prick. But it's really not that big of a thing. Like you've grown things big enough to be able to absorb these kinds of costs, and this kind of behavior is sort of, in a way, tolerated because he was so successful in other ways. And it reminds me of, there have been stories about Bill Gates and taking the mouse concept from Apple way back when, or no, was it from Xerox? Maybe like a copier, something like that. That's where the mouse kind of came from. And then the Windows interface. Does this sound familiar to you at all, Robert? That these ideas kind of, it's like the rap game. You take some snippets from old songs and mix them together, and you create a new song. Our common guest, Mike C, he does this with songs all the time. He can't post them on YouTube because they'll get hit with copyright strikes. But they're really good stuff. But it's a mishmash of other things. And I think it's art. And I think that IP is not a legitimate thing. It's not an actual tangible property. Though I think fraud and being dishonest, those things are enforceable actions that would handle those types of situations. I'll go to Robert for comment.
Yeah, what is the origin of an idea? There are infinite influences on any given idea, realized or unrealized. You may see something at some point and that might inspire you to make a completely different thing. I mean, do you owe some sort of restitution to the creator of that one first thing? If we did, then the economy would never grow. It would be a complete grind everything to a halt. We spend all our time figuring out who was owed what by whom, for what reason, at what time. It'd be ridiculous. Once an idea is out there, it becomes common, and everybody can use it to the best of their ability to create what they desire to create. IP law, all it does is it's protectionism for, it's I understand the desire for it. You want to get your credit for what you see as your idea and your creation. You want to protect the value of it. But all it does is, limit the choices of what can be created. So the origin of an idea, I mean, it's impossible to tell. I mean, sometimes you can point at one thing and say, oh, well, you clearly ripped this idea off from this guy or whatever. But even then, I'm not even so sure. I mean, Vanilla Ice took Under Pressure. Did he completely rip it off? I think it's perfectly fine, honestly.
And you are a big fan.
We wouldn't have Ice Ice Baby. Are you kidding me? We can't have a world without Ice Ice Baby.
I agree.
Yeah, if I had not already made it clear, I'm also in the camp of IP is not a real thing. IP, intellectual property, is not property. Like information and ideas and data is not really property per se. There are the physical components of it, and also, but the main issue at hand is, under normal circumstances, in terms of the voluntary agreements that were in place, whether they were explicit or implied, between the Winklevoss twins and the Zuck. Under normal circumstances, the Winklevoss twins were expecting Zuck not to go and disclose this idea to other parties and not to compete with them in building a competing project. And that's something that is a voluntary agreement that is commonly made in business, that you have people agree to a non-disclosure and to a non-compete, that, hey, you're going to work for us. You have to agree that you're not going to just leave and then go to a competing company. And people very routinely form those voluntary agreements in business. So I think that in this case, that was more or less implied, though it was very reckless of the Winklevoss twins to have blabbed so much about this idea of theirs to someone who hadn't signed anything with them, and made a very loose commitment to work with them, from what it seemed like.
Yeah, the other side of it is, and I know it's hard to really conceive of a world of the counterfactual, but it seems to me that with the improvements in technology and networks and interconnectedness, that a Facebook type thing was an inevitable thing. Like, it would eventually happen, whether it wasn't Facebook. Maybe MySpace would have figured out how to keep people on that platform or whatever, or be able to grow it and it become basically what Facebook is now. So I don't even know if the idea itself is like all that groundbreaking. It was going to get discovered. It was just a matter of time and a matter of, I guess, who. And it happened to be, Zuckerberg, and as portrayed in this film, him kind of being a prick and screwing people over. But
yeah, well, that was a big aspect of it, that, like you said, maybe it would have been more honest for Zuckerberg to make the Winklevoss twins what they wanted, that little small platform of their little inkling of an idea, and then gone off and done his way bigger, better thing. However, like they said in the movie, being first is everything. Like, the Winklevoss twins had that one guy that hung around with them, I forget his name, who said, in business and in technology, being first is everything. And their response was, hey, we row crew, we race for a living. You don't have to tell us that. You don't have to lecture us about the importance of being first. And I think that was part of what probably motivated Zuckerberg to do that, to act in that way that was a little bit dishonest, and go and build his thing so that he could be the first.
I've heard a saying that's related to this. It's pioneers get shot, settlers get rich. So it's not necessarily that you're the first. You let the first ones take the arrows and you figure out where they failed and fell down, and then you build a better mousetrap.
Well, I'm curious, because obviously this wasn't like this like brand new idea. Like Friendster and MySpace were already a thing, and they weren't, obviously he innovated off of those ideas, but how much different was Facebook from those things? Like obviously the relationship status and probably a few other things, I guess, with the originally being an exclusive thing.
I remember having relationship status on a MySpace back in the day.
Yeah, you can still do that, I'm sure, right?
Facebook though, or after?
Well, it would have been in probably 2004 or 5 before I even had a Facebook.
So you were on a Friendspace or a MySpace or a Friendster.
That happened to be when this film was taking place. Well, this film was actually taking place in 2003. So I'm sure that it was in very short time that MySpace and other platforms followed suit with the relationship status, though, at least as far as the film goes, kind of depicts Facebook being the first to major platform to do that. And it was combined with other differentiating factors, the exclusivity of you had to be at Harvard, or you had to be at one of these Ivy League schools, or you had to be, eventually it was, you have to be in college. For a little while, it was, you have to be in college. And then eventually it was, actually anybody can be in Facebook as long as you're over 18 or whatever it was. And then it was, oh, you have to be over 16 or something like that. And also it was the UI aspects of it, that it was clean, minimalist, sort of it was a type of user interface that appealed to a certain type of people that were the target audience, these college kids and cool people.
Right. And it was more dynamic as well. I think that's one of the things that stood out, because I recall MySpace was like you had a page and other people had a page and you could go see their page or post things on your own page. But there wasn't this hallway or this like common area, which is kind of like the news feed now or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you would see different things kind of popping up and happening. So it kind of created a more of a nexus or more of an interchange. What do they call it? Like a clearinghouse or a cross-docking situation? I think that was maybe one of the key differences.
Yeah.
The friending, they pointed out the friending aspect of it too, that it's exclusive in the sense of somebody has to friend you or accept your friend request. Otherwise, you're not going to see their stuff, and vice versa. And so that added an element of exclusivity where suddenly that was the way to get in touch with someone is, hey, friend me or Facebook me.
Right. And that came at the time when, there was a critical mass where, with the adoption of anything, like the adoption of a currency, like how was society going to figure out what kind of currency we're going to use? Well, Facebook got to be a certain size, so big, so that, if you were going to talk to somebody, you had to get on Facebook, because this was just what everybody was doing.
Yeah, the old network effect. I remember the first time I heard about Facebook, it was a girl who I knew, and she told me about it, and she was telling me that she'd put all this information on there. I'm like, are you sure you want all that information out there? Like her birthday and like full name, where she was born, where she lives, all this stuff. And it seemed really odd to me.
Robert's point about people voluntarily giving this information, there's no doubt that that's foolish. And I will perfectly admit that it's probably very foolish of me to divulge so much information that could be used against me or used to commit identity theft or other types of crimes, or simply to be used by the thought control establishment, whatever, to harm me. However, it's kind of to the point where it's really sad, because it's either that or you practically don't exist to a large percentage of the population, that's where they interact with people socially. And if you're not on there and divulging a lot of this information, then you're just not part of the world for a lot of people, if that makes any sense. So
yeah, that's certainly true. There's definitely the feeling you get when you're on Facebook. And it's, for me specifically, someone who has had an account forever, I don't know, forever, but at least 7-8 years, but has only started using it on a routine basis because it's my job. But now I'm seeing all this interaction between all these people, whereas before I was essentially a non-person. So yeah, I can see your point.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary to think about, where it's going to go. Like Miguel, you were talking about this fourth industrial revolution with the big data and the AI and the algorithms, machine learning and all this stuff. But it's also, you mix that in with what we're seeing with the First Amendment and editorializing and banning people or throttling things or putting little disclaimers down below posts saying, well, this has been debunked by Snopes. You're starting to see the crafting of thought and the manipulation of ideas. And we're just probably a few years behind what they're doing in China. I mentioned it earlier, the Sesame Credit, which is a similar social network, but instead of like a credit score, you get a citizenship score. It's how good of a government, drone are you? And your score is dependent on the people in your network score. So if somebody is a dissident or is a bad citizen, they're going to drag your score down. So you're incentivized to ostracize them. It's scary, Brave New World shit that it seems to be going down the road towards. And then they've got Zuckerberg in front of Congress the last couple of years, famously last year where he looked like Data from Star Trek.
He absolutely looked like
no emotion whatsoever. And then he was recently in front of AOC telling her about the First Amendment. And she said some crazy, stupid shit, of course. But she wants like them to prevent people from lying or something. And it's like, well, okay, well, why don't we start with you? But anyway, take it away, Miguel.
Well, of course, it just has to be said that, we have to eat the babies. Did you see that video?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about.
Well placed.
Another thing on that note, did you guys see that episode of Black Mirror that pretty much was what you just described about the social credit scores?
No, I haven't seen any Black Mirror episodes. We did, whatchamacallit, the Choose Your Own Adventure movie.
Yeah, the Bandersnatch.
Yeah.
But no, we haven't watched the series itself.
I did watch that one, I think. All of the episodes are kind of standalone.
Mm-hmm. And
so my wife and I didn't really get into it. We watched maybe 2 or 3 episodes. And I believe one of them, if I recall, if this is the one, it was the guy who, there were 2 that were sort of like that, I think, where there was like this training center people were in and they were getting scores and they were like riding like stationary bikes and in this virtual environment kind of thing. But then there was another one that was sort of similar. And it was a guy who could see things in art or whatever. He had this like studio style open space house with this kind of floating staircase thing. It's very vaguely there, but you're probably talking about the first one, right?
No, actually, I'm talking about one that if you had seen it, you would know the one I'm referring to, because it was exactly what you described, where there are people in the world that have a really high score, a really high rating. And if they upvote you or they downvote you in one of your posts or one of your interactions, or even face-to-face interactions, a person, everybody's going around with their phones, and it shows people like, you get in the elevator with somebody who has a really high score, and they do because it's displayed on their little augmented reality information that you can see, oh, this person is a 4.8 out of 5. Oh my God, I hope that they upvote me because that'll give me like another 0.2 rating to my rating. And people are going around upvoting and downvoting people. And this woman goes totally insane, where she goes in this downward spiral of her score continually being, dropped down. And it's a pretty cool episode. So just a tangent on, something that came to mind when you described that.
Yeah, it sounds kind of amazing in a way, but also scary as hell. Like, it would be nice to know who are the good people, who are the bad people, just by seeing them, But then it's like a self-reinforcing, self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like in your example of that episode, this woman was getting downvoted. Well, then she spiraled further and further down. And I don't know how you recover from something like that. Like, if that was a real thing,
Yeah, like I'm sure you are probably having to go through counseling ever since being put in the Facebook gulag.
I didn't learn a thing. Well, no, I did learn to use proper mechanic language.
I'm sure that probably set you off into your own downward spiral that maybe resembles Arthur Fleck in The Joker.
Yeah, there's a great meme of Joaquin Phoenix in Her. It says, me entering the idea of the arena of politics 2008 and then today, and he's the Joker, and he's wearing the same kind of red suit, so it works really well together. I'll post that on the show notes page, lessonairs.com/100. But we are actually getting to the point where we're going to start needing to wind this down. So does anyone have any final notes or discussion points they want to make before we get into final summary and review?
Well, we could talk a little bit about Sean Parker and his takedown of the music industry. and whether or not he was doing something immoral or not by making all these file transfers available. I know back when we were around in 2000, I was one of those people that was on Napster, and then I think LimeWire after that. But it seemed like Sean Parker was very much proud of what he did to the music industry, seeing them as immoral. And I don't know, I think he makes a good point about saying, hey, do you want to own a Tower Records now? But and saying how he won as opposed to how they won. But, I don't know. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that angle.
It's a pretty good can of worms.
It is it's a little can. I don't know if anybody, we may not have time.
Yeah, I'll just say that, as I don't think IP is a legitimate thing, once your thing is out there, yeah, I mean, people can kind of do whatever they're going to do with it. I think that he actually broke a model that was, the leftists like to talk about exploitation. I think that a lot of the music artists would only get a very small amount of the proceeds from their sales as a result of being in this position of signing agreements that they weren't fully aware of the consequences of. And they were in a position, there's like an outscaled amount of information on the side of the, production companies versus these artists that they would sign. And so there would always be this friction between them. And it seems like Napster kind of broke that model and then opened the door for a company like Apple to sell songs for $1 each on iTunes and kind of blow up really big. I mean, it's just an innovation, I think. And for the most part, it's probably for the better. Because who would want to own a Tower Records? Do they even exist anymore? And I know there's the famous one in LA, but
I think there's some in Japan still. But yeah, other than that, I don't know.
But it is making a revival too, like LPs, like actual records with a needle. Right. It's kind of become this niche. Horse buggies and whips went away almost, but there's still a few people out there making high quality stuff for the niche
handsome
market.
Cabs.
Yeah, the handsome cabs and all that. So and that's what the market provides. And that's a point that Gene Epstein made in his in both his debates with socialists, Bhaskar and Richard Wolff, was, well, in your society, what would the majority? Why would the majority ever authorize a minority position or product or service to become available? They would always say no.
Right. Because, you're always going to get outvoted because people aren't interested in that thing. But under capitalism, all you need is one person with a little bit of capital and an idea, and they can make that thing.
Yeah, and they can hope to find a market. And if they fail, then, well, apparently not enough people wanted it, or back to the advertising angle, knew about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was a good point. Miguel, you want to put a cherry on the top of that, and then we'll get into a final summary review.
I think it was Sean Parker's character was definitely an underrated aspect of this movie. I think Justin Timberlake did a pretty awesome job. The character is just really entertaining. This larger than life Silicon Valley playboy troublemaker that I think, looking back, it does seem like he really wounded the music industry powers that be. However, it does seem that they have a very powerful stronghold with the entire IP machine. And even though there are a lot of underground, indie artists on SoundCloud these days, you got all these SoundCloud rappers, and you got all these indie musicians that still do their thing. The world of arts and culture is so curated by these very centralized powers that be in Hollywood and in these very entrenched industries that depend on intellectual property regulation and what an Austrian economist would and other free market economists would call economic rent. So I think that his presence he added a cool presence to the movie, cool themes to the movie, where it was a little bit anti-establishment in a way. He was doing things to really build something that was challenging of the status quo.
Yeah, disruptive.
That now has been very much co-opted by the establishment.
Yeah, I'd say that's for Sean and for Zuck. They were both looking to disrupt, and we're anti-establishment, and Zuck seemed to be kind of anti-money for a while there. And this might be a good time to mention there's a couple of books that I'll post on the show notes page that are related to intellectual property. One is Stephan Kinsella's Against Intellectual Property. He has really great arguments theoretical arguments as to why it's illegitimate. And then another book is called Against Intellectual Monopoly, which is almost a economic history of various effects of patents in industries and whether they were positive or negative in their outcome. So I'll post links to both of those books. They're both very, very good. And with that, we should get into final summary review, unless, Robert, were you trying to chime in there before I so rudely cut you off?
Yeah, but I've since forgotten any points I was going to make. So let's do the deal.
Okay, Boomer. All right. Why don't you got the Alzheimer's going on? Why don't you start us off, Robert? Give Miguel the taste of how we do this. We'll score it a decimal point deep, 1 to 10.
Okay. So the script turned in by Sorkin. Yeah, this is the kind of script that I would have just eaten alive 20 years ago. This is like the super witty script that I just would have loved and, wanted to have written myself, where all the characters are just so smart and so funny and just have all kinds of wit and personality and that sort of thing. But now that I'm older and a boomer, apparently, it just comes off as trying really hard, like hyper realistic and unnatural. But it's still very entertaining. But you definitely get the idea that, yes, this is a dramatic script. No, these people did not really say these things. Maybe some, the vibe of the conversation was conveyed, but Sorkin definitely punched up the dialogue to 11, But, so I still enjoyed it. I just didn't love it. I would watch another Sorkin script movie though, and I've always enjoyed Fincher's directing. I mean, ever since like Seven, he's always done good work. Eisenberg, God, he plays a real good asshole. I don't really get him as a charismatic like leading man type though. I didn't like him in Zombieland. I didn't like him in Batman versus Superman. Maybe there's some roles that he's good at, but I don't really get him. I don't get the appeal of him. Timberlake, I thought, was excellent as Parker. And Parker, I think he absolutely earned his 7% stake in the company. I think he really added that drive and the think big approach to what Facebook eventually came to be, which is this massive juggernaut of entertainment and connection. Maybe it would have gotten there anyway, but he definitely helped it along. Let's see, who else was in this thing? Spider-Man, he was okay. He's pretty good. He seemed to be sort of like the alternate main character type guy. Yeah, he was okay. I don't know. But the movie itself was strong. I watched it with the subtitles on. I normally don't do that, but there was a fair amount of time where the dialogue was quiet. And like I said, there's a lot of words. It's a very word heavy dialogue, like Daniel said. But I've got to give this one for entertainment value and I don't know how accurate it all was essentially, but I would definitely watch this again. I'm going to give this like a 7.5.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that. And Miguel, we're going to pitch it right down the heart of the plate for you here.
Cool. Well, taking that. And I would also put it somewhere in the high. Well, I would put it in the high 7s, and basically for convenience, round it up to an 8 out of 10. I think that it was a good movie, very well acted. I happen to think that the script was pretty good, if not for some of that hyperrealism, some of that stuff that you could say dialogue wise kind of jumps the shark. Not necessarily, though. Other great elements of the film, I think, I haven't even mentioned Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which I think is probably a violation on my part of not having mentioned them up until now. That I think that this was one of their first most impactful film scores together, and they created such an interesting atmosphere throughout the film with their score that was sort of at times was suspenseful, sure, and at other times was sort of eerie almost. And I think that really added to the film a lot. And in general, I did find it pretty engaging, entertaining, and will probably go down as a pretty memorable film for its time, telling a pretty important or pretty iconic story, I think, of one of the most powerful companies in our world now. And I really am fascinated by those types of origin stories, as I think most people are. So I think they did a pretty good job. I'd pretty much give it an 8.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for that. And I remember this movie probably more fondly from my first watching than this most recent one, similar to how I viewed Zombieland in theaters, and then versus when we did it recently as an episode with Rachel from Cannabis Heals Me. And the Sorkin-ness really does come through. If I recall, Robert, is Sorkin involved with Molly's Game, that other movie that we did recently? Super dialogue heavy, really fast talking, and kind of hard to follow the plot because it tries to twist over itself a couple of times.
Yeah, I want to say you're right about that. That was the first time we had done a Sorkin project, and this is the second. But I can't be 100% sure without looking it up.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those situations where there's just so much dialogue and it's trying to be so witty that it kind of loses the. It's not as easy to follow the plot because there's so much content to kind of wade through. But if you really break it down to the basics, this is really just a story of a guy who got an idea, perhaps from somewhere else, and then improved upon it and actually had the wherewithal to put it together, throw the blood, sweat, and tears into it, and make it into a big thing. So I do like that story. I like the it really describes the role of the entrepreneur. It's somebody who's actually driving the thing forward, not just repetitively doing the tasks. The left likes to say that all value comes from labor. Well, what about who's going to decide what needs to happen? And another, reference to the Epstein debate. Well, if you have a democratic working environment, then you're going to be in meetings all day trying to make decisions. Everyone's got to make a decision, right? Everyone's got to be involved. So you just be in 10 hours of meetings. But
hey, sorry, I don't know if you were done there. I thought of something that I think is also just, to me, just now noteworthy, in that it is a great story of entrepreneurship, a very iconic story of entrepreneurship, and probably the type of story about entrepreneurship that is allowed to be told because there's a sense of moral ambiguity about it, and it gives the left the room to say, well, see, this is what entrepreneurs are. They're shady and they lie and they steal and they hurt people. And that's how you become successful, is by being unscrupulous and unethical and manipulating people. And we don't really see a lot of movies or positive stories of entrepreneurs who really are very ethical and admirable and lead a good family life with lots of people, lots of loved ones, and good family values, things like that. Like you'll see movies like the Steve Jobs movie where you more of the popular entrepreneur stories are of entrepreneurs that have gotten big and wealthy and that were possibly unethical about it, as opposed to the vast majority of entrepreneurs that are good-hearted, generally good people, and that want to create wealth and want to do so in a good, honest way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just like the founder.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah. If the founder is another great example of that, where, of course, it appeals to both sides. It's the type of story that Hollywood allows because, people will be fans of it if they're pro-entrepreneurship or they're pro-economic freedom and they like stories of enterprise. And then the left will like it because they see it as a story of how capitalism bad. And so there's a kind of, it seems like we can only tell stories about entrepreneurship that are more morally ambiguous.
Well, just consider which of those two markets you describe is bigger.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not a super captivating story when you just got some guy that goes back home to a happy wife and a happy family and, just, I don't know, maybe there's a place for that type of thing. And I'm sure that there's still a story to be told.
It does remind me, though, in the movie, what was it that the dean said? That
Larry
people
Summers?
at Harvard, they don't get jobs, they create jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. That's a very entrepreneurial motto or whatever for any kind of school. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it almost made me respect Larry Summers a little bit because he was kind of an asshole to them, but rightfully so. Of course, he was a Treasury Secretary who, in the 2008 bailouts, kind of made that happen. So not totally a good dude. But anyway, my score, I'm going to go with a 6 on this one. I think I would have rated it higher 10 years ago when it came out or 9 years ago. But yeah, overall, still worth watching. But it's easy to get lost kind of in the dialogue, in the pithiness of it all. But anyway, we need to wind this one down. We've been going a little bit long. So Miguel, thank you so much for being our guest. And I hope you can stick around a little bit longer. We're going to do a little bit more content, especially for our Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is available for our Patreon supporters at lastnighters.com/Patreon. Get in on that action, everyone. Also, take advantage of the lowest prices of the year on a couple of things like Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom, Teachable, the online course platform, or Bluehost, and get your website hosting lowest price of the year at lastnighters.com/Friday. This is episode 100 of the show. You can also find it on the Launchpad Media. And our guest, Miguel, you have a couple of websites. Is the main one going to be mymapscoach.com?
Sure. That is my company website. And for my coaching services, there's information on there, free webinars that we do that are on really interesting business topics for all industries. I'm talking from small business owners to solopreneurs to someone who might be a C-level executive of a larger company or corporation, to creatives even. All types of entrepreneurs. I believe that anybody who is out there seeking to innovate in the market in whatever way is an entrepreneur in their own right. And I'm very proud to be a business coach who also understands Austrian economics and who has a context for how entrepreneurs of all kinds can overcome their whatever challenges they're facing, whether it's sort of organizational leadership, or it might be having a strong business plan, things of that nature. So mymapscoach.com is our website. And my other one with there, which you mentioned earlier, is Amagi Entrepreneurs. And that's at amagi.group. So instead of .com, it's .group. And that's my Facebook group, which is free for anybody who would consider themselves an entrepreneur in some form or fashion. And I think that probably more people out there these days are entrepreneurs than they give themselves credit for, or more entrepreneurial than they'll admit. So I'm excited for that to be a growing community where we discuss all types of business and personal development topics, because I really come from the perspective that in order to lay the foundations for a voluntary, peaceful world, like my mission states, we have to be successful in our own lives and have clarity of purpose and create positive relationships in our personal lives and our professional lives, and go out there and be productive and innovative and create wealth through voluntary win-win partnerships. So that's really what my group is all about. And I appreciate you being a part of it. I invite anybody to join by going to amagi.group.
All right. Well, thanks again. I do enjoy being in the group, and we'll have links to that on our show notes page, lastnighters.com/100, and also to your website, and many of the notes that we'll be posting down there related to our discussion tonight about the social network. And Robert, I think next week we're going to go back down to Jokertown and talk with Shaheen, our man from Australia, about The Killing Joke, which is one of the influences of the Joker movie, or Joker, played by Joaquin Phoenix, of course. So we'll get his perspective on that source material, and then also on Joker the movie, because he was originally going to be our guest, but then he fell ill, even went into hospital down there in Australia, but he has since recovered, and so he'll be back with Force and Fire to talk about The Killing Joke the next time we come back.
Sick.
Or not sick, at least not anymore.
It'll be good. Killing Joke is an old classic comic book from the 80s. And understandably, they redid it as an animation. And I think it's kind of hit or miss. From what I understand, they added some extra material for the movie. And I've heard people talking about it with some mixed results. So I'm interested to see it. Well, and Shaheen's always an awesome guest. And, there's going to be plenty of scintillating conversation, Aaron Sorkin style.
Absolutely. And it's on HBO right now. So if you've got that, you will be able to watch that one. And we will be back next week. So let's see. Check out the deals page. And we're going to get into some Kathleen Turner Overdrive just after this. So we'll say good night from last night, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.